But let's talk now about the first round of results with the Southern Carcass Improvement Project, which, thanks to Mark inviting me to do this, I get to show you some of the numbers and summarize that. Does that give you feedback there? I can't tell for sure. It's okay. This project is, in my mind, a landmark type project in the industry. We need projects in this business that show the way in terms of adding capturable value. Not just something that the packer wants, not just something that the feeder wants, but something that everybody wins in doing, something that the producer can get paid for, something that works for the packer and the consumer. In my opinion is that this project does that. It demonstrates, it provides a roadmap along those lines. There is a problem. Every good research study starts with, well, there's a problem out there, right? And we need to fix it. That's pretty easy to find in this case. There is a problem that our industry has had for a very long time, and that is we see consistently low quality grades in our Kansas, Texas packing plants. Chronically low quality grades that have been there for a long, long time, and we still haven't completely fixed it. We can quantify the number of dollars that amounts to, and it's huge. I think very conservatively here, it impacts that whole segment of the industry. There's less ability to build brands on lower grading cattle, and we've seen that. The northern plants, as a rule, the Colorado plants, the Nebraska plants, are running a lot more branded programs, as a general statement, than are the southern plants. And it all starts with the foundation of quality. So that really matters a big deal. And the point, of course, is that most southern genetics just don't have what it takes in terms of quality, southern quality or carcass quality, because what? They've been selected for something else. They've been selected for adaptability rather than carcass quality. Here's some recent numbers, if you can see those. These are from just about a month ago, weekend May 27, 2011. Just the average choice and prime quality grades in these three major packing states. Kansas, right in the middle at 60.5%, Nebraska on the top at 70%, and then Texas at less than 50%. That arrangement in terms of carcass grading differential has existed for many years. It's been sitting there for many years, and yet our industry hasn't, though we have seen some improvement. I would be remiss if I didn't say that. We have not fixed the problem yet. And that any week of the year that you want to look at those numbers for those three states, you're going to see the same kind of structure. Even though choice is always worth more than select, you're going to see that kind of structure. So there's got to be a reason for that. And in fact, you can go back as far as a survey done in 2002 when 135 feed yards in the Southern Plains were surveyed, and they were asked a question, what is this problem? Where is it? What's the origin or what's the source of this problem of low grades in these Kansas, Texas plants? They said it was genetics. 85% of them said it's the genetics that we feed versus the genetics in the northern plants. Now, being a southern cattle feeder, you knew we had to pass the buck, right? We had to blame it on somebody else. It couldn't just be that we can't feed cattle very well. They said it was genetics, and truly it is genetics. The problem really can be boiled down in real simple terms like this. Here's a representative southern cow. You can see she's mixed breeds. She's got some ear in her. We take an ordinary southern bull. All right, that's not the prettiest southern bull you've ever seen, but that's just kind of an ordinary southern bull. And what do you get? You get a calf that looks like that. What I would call a straight southern or an ordinary southern animal. Now, maybe that animal feeds okay. He may gain okay. He may convert feed kind of okay. But is he going to grade? Is there any carcass opportunity with that animal? Well, and I got these pictures from Brian Bertelson. He just took them this past week. They're not hard to find. You can go into the southern feed yards. I don't know if you spent much time there, and you can find pen after pen after pen that look just like that. All right? These cattle absolutely do end up being produced by somebody out there, and they end up in our Southern Plains feed yards in large numbers. Okay, so there's some of them. Here's a few more. You can see that. The problem with these cattle is what? They have very little, if any, ability to grade. They have not been selected really in almost any form for quality grade, and so There's no marbling genetics or very little in their makeup, and so what happens is, literally, I think it's safe to say millions of these cattle go through our system, and what happens? We're disappointed in the carcass result. It is not at all unusual for these kind of cattle to grade 10% choice, 20% choice, maybe 30% choice on a good day. They will tend to drag the average way down, which is not going to create much value for anybody, not for the cattle feeder, not for anybody in the system. And the market will value them accordingly. So this is a major problem, yet to date, really nobody has addressed it until the Southern Carcass Improvement Project, at least that I'm aware of. I estimated some time ago that the annual cost of the industry of those grade differentials is as much as $200 million a year, and it's probably more than that now as cattle prices have come up. So there is a solution, or at least a theoretical solution, and that is take some very high-end Angus genetics that have been selected for growth and for carcass traits, and use those on southern cows. What's the impact of that if that's done? Of course, that's just a theory until it's proven, right? But the idea makes sense. Take some genetics that really have performance and really have carcass value in them, and see what they can do in one generation. From a general concept then of the Southern Carcass Improvement trial design, or the idea behind it is simply this. Take the southern cow and mate her differently. Mate her on the one hand to some high-end Angus sires, like the GAR genetics, that have real carcass value, versus traditional southern genetics that we see used every day, and see how they stack up. Just give those high-end genetics one generation and see how it all works out. And that's really what the SCIP project was designed to do. I liked a couple of quotes that Mark made, and so I'm going to repeat those here. He said, value creation, I should say value instead of value. Value creation is what the Southern Carcass Improvement Project is all about. We're not necessarily trying to change the southern cow herd, but we are trying to change the southern carcass. I would say, Mark, if you want to change that southern cow a little bit, please feel free to do it. But I understand where you're coming from. So that's really the objective there, how much value can be created in one generation. Let's look then at the trial design in a little more detail. Starting with the sire side. The sire side of this project included 8 different breeds. It wasn't about any particular southern breeds. It was breed individually. It was about southern breeds in general, and so there were 8 different sires used. Somebody thought enough of these bulls that they were collected and they were used AI, so somebody valued them highly enough to actually collect some semen on them. So that's the breeds represented there, as you can see. Randomly selected sires from within those breeds. And here's actually some pictures of the sires used, if you can see that. A bunch of different breeds represented. Pretty typical of what we see in the South in many, many cases. Those types of breeds, all containing some ear, not necessarily. There's one Brahman bull used, but the rest of them will be all percentage type animals. And here were the 3 Angus sires then selected by gardeners to be in the trial. Predestined, 50-50, and then a bull that they're, from outside the program that they're using is Ambush 28. So those were the 3 Angus bulls in the research, and of course, again, both groups of sires mated to the same group of cows. The average $V, I just looked that up on those 3 bulls, is $78.45. So a lot of value there from the standpoint of growth and carcass in those 3 bulls. So again, just to show you from a research standpoint, the test group then would be the Gardner Angus sires, the Angus sires on the southern cows, and what we would call a control group in a research setting, southern by southern, or S by S. That's really the way the project was designed. The donor dams, what ended up, since this was an ET-based project, the donor dams came from 3 states in the South, Georgia, Mississippi, and Texas. There were originally 22 of them. Greg ran one white cow off to the moon somewhere. She had a little bit of a disposition issue, and it took Greg and a couple of his cowboys, I think, to finally get her rounded back up. But not all those cows flushed very well, and you would maybe not be surprised. These were cell barn purchased genetics, and so not every one of them produced calves, but there were 12 of them that did produce calves for the study, and they were flushed alternately to the Angus sire group and the Southern sire group. And then also one very important part of the project, and I'll show you some of the numbers in a minute here, DNA was also collected. It was collected on all the sires, it was collected on all the dams, and it was collected on the calves as well in this first round research. So that gives you a little bit of the basic structure. Here's a few pictures of the cows. So pretty typical, again, of what we would see in many of these southern herds. I see a few of you pointing out your favorites there. That's good. That's good. They all have some ear. Some have a little more than others, but mixed breeds, I mean, that's kind of what we see. That's kind of what we see in a lot of these southern herds. Unknown genetic background, but somebody somewhere built these cows and we're actually using them in their herd. Here's another picture of them. Just more of a side shot view to some of the cows again from the 3 states. There they are. I don't think they win any beauty contest, but there they are. Here's a few details on the methods of the study. On the first round, the embryos from these flushes were implanted into recipient cows here on the GardinerAngusRanch, July 8th to 9th, 2009. I find this extremely interesting. Even though they were implanted in 2 days' time, the calving window was over a month long. So the calves, 62 calves born from April 6th to May 10th in 2010. Most of the cattle were just harvested this year. All the cattle were managed alike. Like you do in any research project, you manage all the animals the same and they were treated the same. They were not necessarily managed for maximum quality grade. They were managed the same. And they did go through a winter last winter that was pretty dry here as well, and so they were not necessarily managed for maximum quality grade. They were grown on what wheat pasture was available and supplement. Then we did a survey. Since these animals were not going to be sold, there was a survey done to value or to attempt to value those cattle as weaned calves. And I've got the numbers on that in just a second. Looking at those cattle at weaning time, what were they worth? If they would have been sold as one sire group versus the other sire group, what would they bring? That was the point of that survey. They were finished in adjacent pens then when they went on feed with Sam Hams at Triangle 8. They were finished in adjacent pens. So again, they were handled as much the same from start to finish as is possible. We ended up with 57 head harvested into 2 groups. Brian Burleson was part of this. They were harvested at the Dodge City National Beef Plant. You can see the dates there. You can read it, June 30th and July 27th. So they were sorted into 2 finished groups and harvested on those 2 dates. And then the cattle were, of course, all the carcass data was collected. If you look at the bottom line results here, both of these 2 sire groups, from conception to harvest, had an average of 735 days in which to create value. So they had equal opportunity to create value during that time. So let's jump to the results then. First, starting out with the growth curve. This project really is not designed to quantify the growth curve quite as much. The focus was more on the carcass traits, but as expected, really, and certainly there is value in this, you can see that the performance was different at all levels throughout their growth phase, from start to finish. The Angus calves had shorter gestation periods. As part of that wide calving window, they were shorter by about, I can hardly see these slides, but about 8, just a little over 8 days. And they also weighed 8 pounds less at birth. So they started out lighter than the Southern sire group. By the time they got to weaning, there was not a statistical difference, but the Angus calves had caught up, and there was a 6-pound numerical difference between the 2 sire groups then, though that, as I mentioned, is not statistically significant. The yearling weight phase, though, it changed again, and there was 52 pounds advantage for the Angus sire group. So the Angus sire cattle started smaller, had a faster growth curve, and by the time they were a year of age, they were 52 pounds heavier. So, of course, that was all analyzed in terms of steers and heifers and so forth, adjustments made. So, statistical significant differences, or real differences, you might say, in terms of gestation length, birth weight, and then at yearling. Here's just a graph of that. You look at the growth curve difference, the Angus sire versus the Southern sire. The Angus sire started lighter, a little bit heavier, they're not statistically different at weaning, and then a big difference at yearling. I said I would mention about the survey, the market valuation survey that was done when the cattle were at the time of weaning. Since the cattle were not going to be sold, the way that this was done was pictures were shown to a total of 95 different cattle feeders, auction barn operators, and also some stocker producers. They looked at pictures of both groups, and it was done on steers, and said, okay, what would you pay for these two sire groups, just for what they are? We buy a lot of cattle in this industry based on visual appearance, don't we? We do, and we pay different amounts for that. And so the results stacked up like this. The Angus sire group, this was done during the first half of this year. Prices were a little lower than they are now, but the Angus sire group, $128.09, and the Southern sire group, about 9 cents less, about $9 per hundredweight less, which again is a statistical difference. And this shows then that a producer can get paid for this value. I mean, no surprise, they're going to value those groups differently. It's at almost $65 a head as a VAC 60 type wean animal. I noticed I was watching on Friday this week, or last week, I was watching a little bit of the Superior video, and they ran a set of southern looking cattle in, and they brought, I can't remember the figure exactly, and then right behind that, they brought a group, they sold another group that were about the same weight. These were both high southern cattle, and they were mostly blacks in there, and they brought about 8 or 9 cents difference. And so that's really what this market survey captured, is the fact that the market truly does pay differences, and the people involved in answering the questions of this survey are people that trade literally millions of cattle every year. So they have a very good idea of values of different types of cattle. So that was the valuation at the weaning level or post-weaning phase. Now let's look at some general results before we dive into some of the more detail. If we look on through then, through the feedlot and on through, there was not any measurable difference in yield grade between the two groups. There was a slight numerical difference, but not a statistically significant one. They had more value per head when it was all done. The Angus sire group had more total value, more gross dollars in terms of sales at the end. And then a large economic difference in terms of the bottom line. And before I show you those numbers, I thought you might be interested in seeing some of the results on individual cows. Here's a real pretty face right here, okay? This cow is affectionately known as W3. White tag means she's from Texas. Number 3, good old number 3. She had 4 progeny in the research, all right? So there's W3. Anybody want to guess what she is? I have no idea. Then she has what's known as the wild type coloring. She has some ear, and she has some pretty nice horns. I wouldn't want to tangle with her. Here's 2 of her calves. Okay? She and the random mating assignments matched up with the Brahman bull. And so this calf over here in the lower left is a calf by her, by the Brahman bull, and the top calf there is clearly an Angus sire calf who's by predestined. Now, if you were going to sell those 2 calves at auction, which one's going to bring more? If you had 50 of each, how would they sell? Okay, same cow, they're half-zip calves. Now, interestingly, here's those same 2 steers at finish, or just before harvest. All right. One of them was a CAB animal, out of good old W3. The other one was a select grade animal. All right, and you can see, if you can see these numbers, the predestined sired steer had a carcass weight of 966. He was mid-choice, so he made CAB. Yield grade 3, had a ribeye area of a little over 15 inches, and his total value per head was $17.37. His old half-brother, the Brahman sired animal, didn't weigh as much, 857. He was pretty lean, yield grade 1, mid-select. Had a pretty good sized ribeye, 16 inches. But his value was $1,473 in total per head. So same dam, same age, same everything, except the one animal created $264 per head more value than his half-brother. So a tremendous difference there. And in fact, I told you that W3 had 4 progeny in trial. She had 2 other Brahman sired steers as well. And here, they both graded, in fact, low select. And so if we compare the dollar values here, the Brahman sired cattle, the 3-head average was $1,550. The one predestined animal, graded CAB, was $1,737. So that was a predestined advantage compared to those 3 half sibs of $187 per head. So pretty big difference in terms of what old W3 did. So bred well, you can have certified Angus beef. Bred not so well, low select and low value. And if you look at that eye, you can't see it with the glare very well, but I think Brian was being very generous there in calling that animal low select. It looks like a standard carcass to me, but thank goodness Packers are generous, right? I knew that would get it right. So bred not so well, low value. All right, let's go on to another cow. This is Y99. She's a yellow tag, which means she's a Mississippi cow. Again, I don't know what she is. She's a solid red type cow for the most part. She also had 4 progeny. And here's a couple of them when they were younger, okay? The calf on the right is actually, the calf on the left is a 50-50 heifer. And then there's a steer by a red Brangus bull on the right here. So again, 2 calves, same age, same dam, same management, same everything. And what happened? What happened? Well, here's those same 2 animals just prior to harvest. It's not really fair, is it, to compare a heifer to a steer? Is that really fair? That's not fair. Okay? But it didn't matter because the 50-50 heifer had a carcass weight of 910. She was a choice yield grade 3. She had almost a 16-inch eye and a total value of $1,657 per head. Compared to this red Brangus steer, he weighed less. He weighed 872. He was a select yield grade 3. He had a little under a 14-inch eye, and his total value per head was more than $100 less than that heifer. And again, this cow also produced 2 more steer calves by the red Brangus sire, that same red Brangus sire. And one of them did dollar up a little bit more than the heifer. They both graded select. But one of them was a little bit bigger, 943 pounds, so he beat her a little bit there. But this other one certainly didn't. And yield grade 2 select that had a 15-inch eye, and he was worth just a little over $1,500 in total. So if you put that together and do, so again, same cow, 50-50 on one side, whose semen, interestingly, I can buy for $20 a unit, and this red Brangus bull that it costs $40 a unit. One heifer, on average, her value $1,657. 3 steers, average value of $1,577. So the heifer in this unfair comparison actually beat the average of the 3 steers by $80 a head. $80 a head out of the same dam side genetics. So again, pretty impressive result there. Here's another one, G22. She had 5 progeny. She's a Georgia cow, green tag, Georgia cow. She had 5 progeny in the study. She was an identified low marbling potential cow. Okay, I mentioned the DNA scores were collected. She had a 4 on a 10 scale for marbling and percent choice. So she would be what we'd say below average for sure in terms of marbling potential. So what are you going to do with a cow like that? Well, if you mate her to a bull like predestined, it's interesting because some pretty good things can happen there. Here's the first animal, and she's a 4, as you see up there, in terms of her DNA score for marbling. Predestined's a 9. Here's one steer, pretty stout looking steer. He was a choice yield grade 3, 978 pound carcass. His DNA score was 8, and he had a total value of $1,778 per head. Now that's a good example, but I'm going to show you more of them. Here's another one. Here's steer number 2. This steer, had he been colored a little bit different, could have made certified Angus beef because he was mid-choice marbling. He had just right the threshold into the middle of choice. He had an identity DNA score of 7. So again, pretty good. Number 3 is a powerful looking heifer, I would say. She was a choice yield grade 2. Very impressive ribeye of 17.2 square inches and an 886 carcass weight. Good for a heifer again. And she had an identity DNA score of 7. Another one, number 4, so we just keep showing that this is working time and time again. Choice yield grade 3 steer, a little over 900-pound carcass weight, DNA score of 7, so another choice grading animal out of a low grading potential cow. And the last one, number 5, choice yield grade 2, just under a 900-pound carcass weight, small 70 marbling. This animal probably could have been fed just a little longer. He'd have made certified Angus beef, but also had a DNA score of 8 for marbling. So what we're showing here is that this mating, when you're taking a low DNA marbling cow, mating her to a bull that has a lot of carcass genetics, 5 out of 5 progeny graded choice. 5 out of 5 predestined made that cow progeny graded choice. It's interesting to me, and I don't know how to explain this, all 5 were 7 or 8 DNA scores on the progeny. Now that's above the mathematical average that you get if you just average a 9 and a 4 together. Why did that happen? I don't know. Is there something going on in terms of marbling prepotency there? Maybe. I don't know, but I do know that you take a low marbling potential cow, breed her to this type of a bull, and you can get to the choice grade, and you can get there pretty consistently. At least that's what the results showed here with 5 progeny. We got, let's see, maybe 2 more of these. W cow, Texas, number 1. This one's a favorite. Got a curled, broken horn there. Looks to me like she has maybe certainly some continental genetics, maybe some limousine genetics, and some Brahman in her. This cow, just by, you might say bad luck, but just the way it worked out in the random mating assignments, she got matched up with this bull. He's a Simbra bull, okay? This mating, which was replicated a number of times here, turned out to be a case study in how to create low value. They can do it, and they can do it repeatedly. That's what we learned from this. Okay? So 5 progeny from that mating right there that you see. 5 progeny, some steers, some heifers. Let's go through it. Here's a heifer, top one there, low select grade, yield grade 3.7 with 66/100ths of an inch of back fat. If you don't know, about a 1/2 inch back fat is average. I would say about a 1/2 inch of back fat is probably average, so she had more than average back fat and was still low selects. How about the heifer below her? The only standard grading animal that was in the whole set. So this mating produced the only standard grade animal that's there at all. Standard yield grade 3.5, so it's not like that heifer wasn't fed long enough. I mean, she was fed plenty long to express whatever marbling potential was there. She was a standard animal. Here's a look at her eye. She was a DNA marbling score 3, by the way, so that identity kind of pegged her pretty well for what she was. Not a very desirable eye in terms of that fat coming into it, and also you don't see a lot of marbling there at all, and she was a standard. She was the only standard in the study. Here's a couple more of them, all right? Low select, steer, 1/2 inch of back fat or a little less. Another low select, heifer, yield grade 2.6 with about 36/100ths of an inch of back fat. And finally, the last one, and yet another low select grading steer, and he had right at 1/2 inch of back fat and was yield grade 3. The average DNA marbling score on all 5 head of that mating was a 3.8. So below average marbling score, below average results. And so what you see here is we were able to produce, not really intentionally, but low value genetics with repeatability. And if you match up, and this I think there's a huge point there, if you match up cattle that don't have any marbling potential, that's what you're going to get over and over and over. And so that's what the case experience with the cow number W1 would suggest. Last one here. Could this cow, now this may have been the highest percentage Brahman cow in the group. I don't know, don't have any way to quantify that, but she had the phenotype. She had the hump, she had the long ears, she had the build, and she looked like a red Brahman to me, or something that's fairly high percentage when you see her picture there. That's what I would say. Could she ever produce a CAD qualifying carcass? Is that even possible from a cow like that? That's a fair question. And in fact, when she was mated predestined, she had 2 of 3 progeny that did make it into the mid-choice quality grade. So they had enough marbling to reach into the CAD program. One of them actually was graded CAB, one of them didn't have a black enough hide to do that. And had some brown, you get that a lot with the mixing of the Brahman type or that wild type gene that's in so many of those cattle. You get some of that. The other full sibling had slight 90 marbling, which would be in the top side of select. There were also progeny in the study from two southern sires that had 3 progeny by this cow, and all 3 of those graded select. So that's the comparison there, and 2 of those were actually not just select, they were in the bottom half of select. Here's the two actually both of them heifers out of that cow and predestined. Both of these 2 had enough marbling to reach into the middle of choice. One, as I said, the bottom one was stamped CAB because she had a black enough hide. The top one, maybe I'd want to argue with Brian a little bit on that because she looks fairly black, but she did have some brown mixed in and so forth. So she was just a mid-choice animal and valued accordingly. Here is actually Brian's favorite animal in the study because he named this steer. Let's see what Brian named him. This was that same cow we're talking about, Y100 and Brayford steer. Very interestingly marked animal. Shows the Brahman phenotype. You know, he was way less than 100%, and he was a low select quality. So I think what you see from that is some repeatability going on with some different cows. But now let's look at the hard figures, okay? Let's look quickly at the hard figures here in terms of carcass and in terms of the economic performance. And this may be the single most important slide that I've shown you so far, because this is the statistically valid, statistically analyzed data in what the Angus sires in this study did versus the Southern sires, okay? I don't have a pointer here, but if you can just read down with me. From a marbling score standpoint, 103 points. That's the statistical valid number. In other words, really what it's saying is it took a low select population and moved them to low choice. If you want to summarize what happened in the study from a quality grade standpoint, that's it. So it added 100 points, a little over 100 points of marbling. Of course, that's very statistically significant. Ribeye area, almost 1 square inch. 0.96 square inches added by the Angus sires in the trial versus the Southern sires. So again, a very highly statistically significant difference. Fat thickness, about 0.12 more on the Angus side. Of course, as I mentioned, they had a little quicker growth curve, and so they were a little more finished, given the equal number of days that were in the trial. Carcass weight, 61-pound advantage. In this market, when cattle are selling for $1.80 to $1.85 on a carcass weight basis and so forth, I mean, that's quite a few dollars in itself. 61-pound carcass advantage in the same age. Yield grade, no significant difference. No significant difference. So again, this is really what the trial was designed to test. And hey, they passed, didn't they? Okay, these high carcass Angus sires in this study really made a huge improvement in the southern cow population. If you look at the quality grade specifically, you see the Angus sire group and the Southern sire group. We did not have, this kind of surprises me, but there was not a single Southern animal that graded choice. They were all select with 1 standard. But on the other hand, the Angus cattle had no standards. They had 3% in the low select category, 29% high select, and low and mid choice was over 60%. This number, 69% choice and prime, would actually qualify as being better than average in these southern plants today. I showed you the numbers on that earlier. They're probably going to be more in the 50 to 60% range on average between Kansas and Texas. So if you got a set of cattle that goes 69% choice, they would actually be above average. So 1 generation of the high value Angus genetics got you slightly above average there. Here's what that looks like graphically, and as a guy who likes numbers, I kind of can see 2 bell curves there. If you look at the distribution of the quality grade, you can see the southern cattle, which is the orange bars. It's kind of a bell curve that has shifted to the left, lower quality grades. On the other hand, the Angus sire cattle, you can see a bell curve that has been shifted to the right and reaches more up into the choice and even up into the upper choice. So you can kind of draw the lines on it and see exactly what that's showing. Carcass and live weight premiums, that's something we always talk about, isn't it? You know, what did they do in terms of versus the average market the week they were sold? Did they bring a premium? Did they not bring a premium? All these cattle were aging sourced, and so I subtracted that piece out since that was the same between the two groups. And what you can see here on a carcass weight basis, the difference favors the Angus-sired cattle by about almost $26 a head. And then on a live weight basis, which would include the impact of dressing percent, that's essentially the difference of looking at it those two different ways. The difference was over $54 a head, and so the premiums were, of course, much larger on the Angus-sired group, and the dressing percent was part of that when you look at it. Okay. This is another very bottom line, again, probably maybe again the most important slide, or one of the most important slides I want to show you, because it's the economics. These two groups of cattle had exactly the same number of days to create value, didn't they? Exactly the same number of days. The Angus by Southern cattle dollared up to the tune of $134 a head more than their Southern by Southern counterparts. $134 per animal was the result in this first round of the study. They did eat more feed, and so there's about $41, a little over $41 additional feed charge that has to go against the Angus-sired group. When you put that in, though, you still have a net economic advantage of almost $93 a head. Almost $93 a head. So a huge economic advantage there. Very substantial, probably more than I would think about anybody would have guessed. And these cattle were not sold on a high choice select spread market. They were sold in the summer, which is kind of in the middle of that graph, when the choice select spread was kind of $4 to $5 a hundredweight. If they were sold when the spread was wider like it is today, those numbers would spread even. Okay, I'm getting some kind of a little one there. So let's draw the conclusions. Well, let's get this off here first. What's the bottom line? What's the major takeaway messages from all of this? I think it's very safe to say that low grading, low value carcasses are pretty easy to make. They're pretty easy to make. Just use a generic mix of southern genetics that don't have a lot of carcass quality in their background, and that's absolutely what you're going to get. The study showed that. It showed that across all the cattle that were in that treatment group. But on the other hand, significant carcass quality can be added in just one generation. In just one generation using the high value, high carcass Angus sires. They did an excellent job of bringing the value up, and so, yeah, it's not that complicated in a sense. It's fairly easy because genetics do make that kind of a big difference. I think also with the survey and experience of watching a lot of cattle trade, the market recognizes this. The market knows a lot of the things that we've just talked about, and so it's going to value cattle differently depending on what it sees. Now, can we appraise everything about cattle visually? Of course not. We can't. But the market can see quite a few things, and especially when the differentials are large, you're going to see a big impact in terms of how those cattle sell through an auction and what the bid's going to be if you're selling with an order buyer or what have you. And lastly, both in gross value and in net economic dollars, the Angus sires did extremely well in adding value, adding profitability to these cattle versus the southern sire. No question about that either. So top line value creation, of course, is one thing. It's a very good thing. We like to sell at higher prices versus lower, but profitability is even better, and that's that net economic value. After you paid the bills, what's left? And the Angus sires in this study did both things. They did both things. And that's what the demonstration of the project really is all about. So it really, truly, I think, gives a roadmap to southern producers. It shows them that there is capturable value that can be attained here, and it's not that complicated. And the project is not over. So with that, I'm winding down here to the end, but the project actually is not over because there's another 56 head or so of those cattle, some just out here in the pens, that are phase 2, or the 2011 born calves. So the study is being replicated for a second year just to prove its validity. I think like you do at the end of a movie, roll the credits, right? I think from an industry perspective, I want to thank these people because they're doing something that is very valuable to our industry. And that is they're willing to step out and put the energy and time and money into a project that will teach the industry a lot in terms of how much value can be created, how much real benefit can there be to using the right kind of genetics in today's marketplace. And so the Gardiner family and the ranch crew, certainly all of them deserve a lot of credit. Sam Hands, who fed the cattle, Brian Bertelson, who also helped tremendously on the carcass side with National and USPB, and then Jim Gibb on the with the Genetic DNA. So my hat's off to all of you who participated in that, who made that possible.